You're taking a look inside Kansas politics. Welcome in, I'm Deneysha Richard. Well, it's the debate that seems to never end, medical marijuana. And while surrounding states, they've actually passed laws allowing the use of medical and some even recreational marijuana. In the state of Kansas, both are still illegal. But as we said before, there could be some movement on medical marijuana, and we're going to talk about that today. Joining me is a CBD store owner, and he is urging legislators to light up the medical marijuana debate and make it happen in next session. Joining me is Jason Todack. Jason, thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, you know, you are actually the owner of the first CBD store in Kansas. And Jason,
Yes.
It's interesting. You told me that you were very strategic with the placement of your store. You placed it next to the GOP headquarters.
The GOP headquarters is located over at Plaza 21, and we were looking at several spots, and when we saw that one, we were like, oh my God, that is obvious. So we wound up putting it there. And I spent a lot of time actually standing outside, kind of drinking coffee and offering free samples to whoever would listen, because the way I looked at it is that if somebody's going to change somebody's opinion, it needs to start with a single person. And some people's opinions aren't going to change, some will. And in that time, you know, as things started taking off, as the store started getting more recognition, you know, I had to learn a lot about cannabis, and I knew quite a bit from, you know, being younger and stuff. Mm-hmm. You know, I think most people experiment when they're younger, but as you get older, you know, you tend to focus more on career, future, children, stuff like that. Going back to my roots and thinking, okay, I'm really going to do this. I'm going to step forward and sell weed.
Okay. You put it that way.
Well, and that was the thought and
Right.
stuff. But after meeting Vince Sanders and him explaining the endocannabinoidal system, how CB1 and CB2 receptors work, and at the time I was having so many issues with nasal polyps that spread in my sinuses, as it started spreading and going out my temple, down the side of my head, I started getting tumors, and then they started growing into my head. I started having seizures, and it was kind of a last resort. It was one of those things that I've done a lot of research on what can help with the tumor growth and inflammation, and CBD just seemed to be the thing.
So I'm sure that's what you told the legislators when you saw them coming in and out of the GOP
Yes.
headquarters. What was the feedback on that?
The feedback was actually very positive. A lot of them wanted to interact and talk and stuff, and a lot of them were talking. And, you know, it was one of those things like, as it started getting more notoriety, next thing I know, you guys got hold of us, and we exploded because it was something that wasn't ever done before in the state of Kansas. And the way me and Vince Sanders looked at it when we were starting off CBD American Shaman was, if we can do it in Kansas, we can do it anywhere.
And so in the midst of the success, let's fast forward to when the store was raided.
Yes.
Tell me about what that experience was like for you. I mean, basically you were being treated like a criminal at that time.
Well, I will say this. They came in there, they were fairly friendly. They told us, you know, nobody's being arrested, nobody's going to jail. We are doing a search and seizure. We are seizing any products that have THC in it. Well, one of the problems with that is that Kansas does allow full spectrum hemp oil, and that does have THC in it. And we had all kinds of different products in there. You know, as long as it's derived from industrial hemp and the THC levels are under 0.3% by dry weight volume, it makes it federally and state legal. For people that are dealing with different issues in their life, whether it is depression, anxiety, PTSD, whether it is pain and suffering, I have tens of thousands of customers over the past 5-6 years that came into my store for every reason under the sun. And I can't make promises, but I can tell you what it has done for me, and I know what it's done for other people, and I know what research has been done. In this time, you know, I've had people come in, and you hear this all the time, it's not FDA approved. Well, you can't FDA approve anything natural. It has to be patented. So it's never going to get FDA approved. So to me, that's kind of a loose thing to say in any kind of cannabis argument.
We're going to talk a little bit more about what you hear about the stigma of medical marijuana and basically what you want legislators to know when it comes to the debate for medical marijuana. So Jason Todack, he is going to continue talking with us today on Inside Kansas Politics. We'll be right back, so stay with us.
Save with Vanderbilt's and Ariat. Receive up to a $100 rebate on any Ariat product. Choose from a wide selection of clothing and footwear to maximize your savings. Stylish and comfortable men's Ariat terrain waterproof boots on sale $99.99. Durable Ariat rebar work jeans. Our price $52.99. New colors just in. Check out Ariat's Vernon soft shell starting at $114.95.
Work boots and a Vanderbilt.
Winter Wonderland is celebrating its 25th year, and all of your favorite light displays are back, plus some new additions you're going to love. When you drive through this amazing 2-mile light display, you not only get to experience the beauty of the season, but you'll be supporting TARC and thousands of individuals with disabilities who rely on its services. Donations can be made at the gate, or you can get advance tickets at these locations. Don't miss this holiday tradition. Please join us in supporting TARC and Winter Wonderland.
Ballet Midwest will delight you with the Nutcracker at TPAC December 9th, 10th, and 11th. Details are at balletmidwest.net.
Winter Wonderland is celebrating its 25th year, and all of your favorite light displays are back, plus some new additions you're going to love. When you drive through this amazing 2-mile light display, you not only get to experience the beauty of the season, but you'll be supporting TARC and thousands of individuals with disabilities who rely on its services. Donations can be made at the gate, or you can get advance tickets at these locations. Don't miss this holiday tradition. Please join us in supporting TARC and Winter Wonderland.
Someone was in over the weekend decorating here.
Are they scented, the trees? Do we know?
Next live, Claire Foy plus Gabourey Sidibe.
Monday morning at 11 on 27 KSNT.
Welcome back to Inside Kansas Politics. I'm Deneysha Richard. Continuing our conversation on medical marijuana. Jason, we were just saying a lot of facts about CBD and medical marijuana. Lots to unpack here. But what many think in the state of Kansas and all over the country, really, some people believe that there is a stigma attached to medical marijuana.
Well, there's a bit of a stigma. You know, I've heard people say it's the Trojan horse, but what most people don't realize is that people are going to do what they're going to do. You know, if they feel that it's going to help them in the long run, okay, they're going to step across the line, whether it's legal or not. And unfortunately with cannabis, you know, when they push the war on drugs, it's not a war on the drugs, it's a war on the people. And when I see these people struggling with day-to-day things, having to take pharmaceuticals that they're getting addicted to, or is causing actually issues where they have a chain of, I have to take this one to actually counteract this one and take this one to counteract this one, where you have something that's 100% organic, your body has an endocannabinoidal system, and your body is literally set up to use these plants and herbs. My problem with it is that when you do actually get into a debate with somebody with a stigma, they want to bring up that, you know, whether, and this is one of the things that happened with my raid, the sheriff's officers talked about different gang members and stuff like that, having these products. And really, in my mind, that has nothing to do with cannabis. I have met people from all walks of lives that walk into my store, and some of them are just kind of like, because they don't want people knowing, and that's okay, that's perfectly fine. But over time, you know, it does need to be treated a little bit more like alcohol. You got to be 21 to get it. It needs to be regulated. You know, I don't want to see like Oklahoma, where there's over 2,000 dispensaries in Kansas. That would actually probably hurt the business more than anything. It would actually hurt a lot of things along the lines.
So you believe in responsible legalization?
Yes,
yeah,
very
okay.
much so.
Okay, so when you think about this, we've seen other states legalize medical marijuana, some even recreational marijuana. We've seen it over in Missouri. So you are the owner, as we said before, of the first CBD store in the state of Kansas. You're a business owner. So as a business owner, what do you think that will have, what effect do you think that will have on your business, having people be able to get access to marijuana over the state line? What do you think will happen to you?
Well, I'll tell you this. We had multiple stores down in Wichita, and when Oklahoma legalized marijuana, we started seeing the sales drop. And as I said earlier, you know, things kind of progress with cannabis, and eventually it is going to work the Delta 9, but it's like right now it's at 0.3% by dry weight volume in the state of Kansas. Now, when you have Colorado, Oklahoma, Missouri, and we're going to see Nebraska, I mean, do we really want Nebraska to beat us to the punch? Do we want to be the last ones? Because quite frankly, what would that tax revenue do for us? What would it do for our schools? I mean, here recently I saw about a bunch of teachers in Lawrence actually being laid off, schools being shut down. I've seen where people are having issues funding education programs. If you drove around Topeka, I mean, you know as well as I do how bad the streets are. These are things that we can help with our own infrastructure with the tax money that comes from this. Not just that, but also families that can get into the business, and farmers that have went down dead-end roads where they're not making money off their crops the way they used to. Hemp is booming in Kansas right now. There are people growing it left and right. But at the same time, once we get medical marijuana in here, what is Kansas most famous for? Our agriculture. So if we actually take medical marijuana and our agriculture and put it together, what is stopping Kansas from being the United States powerhouse?
And is that your message to legislators? What do you want to say to legislators who may be wondering, hey, should I push this forward?
Well, I'll tell you this. As a legislature, I would think you need to step back and take a look at the black market that's coming in. You need to look at the fentanyl overdoses of people going out and trying to buy opioid products when we actually have an opioid crisis. And the products that they're buying, they eventually get cut off from the pharmaceutical, or the doctor says, no, you're getting addicted to it. So where do they go? They go to the black market. What are we seeing coming down I-70, up I-35? We're seeing fentanyl-laced opioid pills. And the biggest issue with this is, how do you combat this, all right? People are going to do things whether you like it or not. Unfortunately, it's just how it is. You can't stop a guy from robbing a store. You can't stop a guy from stealing a car, and you can't stop a guy from smoking a joint. Now, you can sit there and shake your finger and say you're doing the wrong thing, but in his mind, he's doing what he needs to do to survive. And sometimes that's more important than anything. What I would like to see come out of the legislature in this session is a clear bill of what is allowed in Kansas, you know, not allowing hundreds of companies from across the country. You know, we don't need cannabis shops that have 1,000 different things in it right now. Right now, we need pilot programs.
We could definitely go on for hours and hours, but I do thank you for your time on coming in here and chatting with us a little bit about what you want legislators to know. Jason Todack, the first CBD store owner in the state of Kansas, talking about medical marijuana and how it would benefit the state of Kansas. Thank you for joining us today. All right, well, coming up, we talk to a political analyst about a survey that reveals why Kansans voted the way they did in the general election. We'll be right back.
Devon James wins.
After a car accident, life gets tough.
At Devon James, we fight for what really matters.
You have your everyday bills and now the accident bills.
You have to get better while you're still trying to get by.
And who knows what's down the road?
So call us at Devon James. We'll fight for everything you deserve.
And you don't pay us anything until we win your case.
That's our no-fee guarantee.
Devon James wins. Call 888-8888.
Enter the KSNT Home for the Holiday Sweepstakes for your chance to win a national prize of $15,000. Simply go to ksnt.com to enter. KSNT Home for the Holiday Sweepstakes is sponsored by these fine sponsors.
This is a fish. A clownfish, actually. He lives in a reef like this, in an ocean like this. This ocean contains these currents. These currents help carry fishing boats like these. Fishing boats like these bring their catch to port. Their catch is loaded onto this truck and delivered to this restaurant. This restaurant serves dinner to this family. This family drives back to their home. Their home borders this forest. This forest surrounds this creek. This creek trickles into this river down to these mangroves. These mangroves buffer the coastline from this bay. This bay is a hunting ground for this shark. This shark swims out to this ocean. This ocean flows over this reef. This reef is home to this fish. This is a fish, a clownfish actually.
Welcome back to Inside Kansas Politics. I'm Deneysha Richard. Well, the election was weeks ago, but a new poll shows what really brought Kansans and Americans as a whole out to the polls and why they voted the way they did. We're talking about Kansas election trends. Joining me is Bob Beatty. Bob Beatty, political analyst, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
So lots of facts in this survey all around, but one of the biggest things that many learned and that we learned is that Kansas may not be as red of a state as many people think it is.
Well, that's an interesting point. First of all, it's an exit poll, so it means literally as voters were coming out after voting, they were being polled. So that's a really interesting type of poll.
Yeah, so what they were thinking.
You only get it every couple of years,
yeah.
Right? And, you know, first of all, I want to say that, you know, people are complicated beings, right?
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes we say, oh, Republicans, Democrats, they all think this. And I think sometimes politicians and the parties feel that way. when we look at this poll, Deneysha, we see that Kansans actually think about issues in many different ways, and just because they're a member of a political party, they're not going to think a specific ideologically way.
And so this poll may actually be a little bit more accurate than many of the other polls that we've seen, because we're actually getting those emotions out of Kansans right as they come out of the polls.
Right, and I always like exit polls because I think they're going to be pretty accurate, because as you mentioned, it's not speculating, oh, how do I think about something? It's you just did it. You just went and voted, and then you're going to tell someone about it.
Okay, so another fact that I thought was pretty interesting was the support for Trump.
Yeah, you know, 39% of Republicans said that they're MAGA Republicans, basically Trump supporters. Of course, only 50% of Kansans are registered Republicans. And so we're talking still about, about 20-some-odd% that are very strong Trump supporters. I would argue that's probably down from 4 years ago, and that nationally we're going to see if that keeps playing out in terms of Trump support, maybe being a little bit less than it was a couple of years ago.
Okay, so as we said earlier, lots of facts to unpack in this survey today, but we're going to break it down a little bit.
Sure.
So one of the largest and most popular races in the past election was the race between the two Chris's. The Attorney General's race. We had Chris Mann, Democrat, and then we had Chris Kobach, Republican. And so those numbers really showed how Kansans were thinking about the two of them. One of the biggest things that it revealed was that people don't know much about Mann.
Yeah, so this is after the election. Obviously, people have voted. They're asked, what do you know about Chris Mann? And Deneysha, over 50% of voters on Election Day in Kansas actually said they didn't have enough information to have an opinion about Chris Mann. I was shocked when I saw that, because you're right, this was one of the biggest races in Kansas, a big race nationally. Everybody seemed, well, not everybody seemed to know Chris Kobach pretty well, but really it showed, I would argue, that this is why Chris Mann lost. That when you have 50% of the voters that don't know enough about you to really be comfortable to tell someone they do, it's going to be hard to convince them to vote for you.
But when you think about it, Kobach had a high unfavorable rating. That was very surprising. And, you know, when you think about it, that brings in the conversation of the term lesser of two evils. When, okay, I don't know this person, but even though I don't know him, he's better than that person, so I'm just going to vote for this guy. And that didn't happen with Chris Mann. People just still voted for Kobach. Why do you think that happened?
Well, the numbers are absolutely fascinating. I won't get too wonky. I'll try not to. But in this survey, 59% of the people that voted on Election Day said they were Republicans or leaned Republican, which means they're probably unaffiliated, but they kind of lean that way. 59%. Kobach wins with a little over 50%. So really what we're saying is there's a lot of Republicans or people who felt like they were Republicans that voted. And Chris Kobach's a Republican. Now, keep in mind that if 50% of the people say, I don't know about this Chris Mann, I don't have any information on him, they're going to defer, at least many of them, to what party they affiliate with. That's the one thing they do know.
Ah, okay.
And so I think a number of them said, yeah, I'm not a Kobach fan, but he is a Republican, and I don't know anything about Chris Mann. I guess I'll vote for Kobach. Just enough people did that. Keep in mind that Kobach only wins by less than 2 points. It's a super close election. So I just, again, want people to think about, here's a candidate, Chris Mann, where half the voters didn't really know him, and he still only loses by 2 points. That shows you, like you mentioned, that Chris Kobach actually had some pretty high unfavorables.
Well, let's go into Kelly and Schmidt for the gubernatorial race. So Kelly actually outperformed multiple Republican candidates or Republican elected officials on this survey, including Trump. So her favorability was quite high.
It was. I was surprised to see these numbers. She had a 56% job approval, so that's 56% of voters said they liked the way she'd be doing her job. 54% just outright said they kind of liked her. You know, they had a favorable opinion, and so that's a plus 12 over those who didn't have a high opinion of her. Derek Schmidt was even, 45-45. But as you mentioned, Joseph Biden, the president, had a negative 28. That's not very good. Even Donald Trump had a negative 2, and as we just talked about, Chris Kobach had a negative 16. So yeah, Laura Kelly is one of the most popular politicians in the state of Kansas, and really that made it difficult for some Republicans to go in there and say, you know, I kind of like her. Some of them still voted Republican, but obviously a number of Republicans said, I do kind of like her, I think I'll vote for her.
Okay, all right, so good thoughts. We're going to continue those thoughts.
Right.
We will be right back here on Inside Kansas Politics. Surprising statistics on abortion rights. That's straight ahead. Stay with us.
The first 5 years make all the difference when children begin to understand the world around them and start to develop their sense of self, to walk, to talk, to trust, to give and receive love. Let's set them up for success right from the beginning. Together with our partners, the Kansas Department for Children and Families is working to make high-quality child care available for each child, every family, all Kansans. Get involved at childcareinkansas.com.
Welcome back to Inside Kansas Politics. I'm Deneysha Richard, continuing our conversation on election trends with political analyst Bob Beatty. Now, one of the other things that was very interesting, a very interesting fact in the survey, COVID and schools. So one of the rhetorics that we heard throughout the campaign, especially from the Republican side, was that the COVID school lockdowns, bad, 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 bad.
Yeah.
Survey says many Kansans said, good, 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 good.
Yeah, again, I was surprised by a lot of this, to be honest, and 63% of those who voted on Election Day in Kansas said they were either okay with the policies during COVID or they didn't go far enough. I mean, so...
they did not go far enough.
63%, so that was a misfire for those who thought, oh, people are going to be really angry at Laura Kelly. And I want to say this, Deneysha. For 4 years, I've been tracking Laura Kelly's approval ratings. And they've been at 50% every year. They're a little higher this year. But even during COVID, they stayed at about 50%, a little higher. I did not see a huge dip. So when we heard this sort of attack on her, for the policies during COVID, I did sort of wonder, I didn't see that people were super unhappy. So it's called the silent majority. In Kansas, it's not a huge majority. But what it is the people that really complained and were yelling and protesting, we heard them. But meanwhile, 63% were out there saying, we kind of agree with what's going on here. Really interesting.
But does that mean, because the COVID lockdowns for the school and the restrictions on, like, let's say, masking, those are two totally different things. So just because Kansans were okay with the COVID school lockdowns, that doesn't necessarily mean they were okay with the other restrictions. Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, you're right on that. But what we're looking at is that in terms of the election, Republicans decided to attack, like you mentioned, Laura Kelly on the school policy.
Lockdowns, yes.
And not as much on the mask.
I didn't hear much about masking if at all.
They chose schools, and according to the voters, no, actually we weren't that upset about that.
So based on maybe your observations, do you think that that could possibly mean Kansans are prepared for, let's say, another elected officials to place a restriction, COVID lockdowns, on us again? Do you think that they would accept it?
Well, that's a great question, because what it does is, I would argue that Governor Kelly, in a sense, went with her gut. She went with what she felt was right. As she argued, she followed the science. And most Kansans, 63% at least of voters, agreed with her, and they trusted her to do that. And so that does give hope sort of to a Republican or Democratic governor going forward. If you're straightforward and you go with what you think is right, you will get the support of the people. Okay,
so picking your brain a little bit here, do you think there would be a difference between a state mandated restriction versus federal? Do you think Kansans would take it better, say, coming from their governor versus the president locking everything down?
Oh, I think no question. I mean, when you and I look at this exit poll, we did see a big difference between, like, Joe Biden, Congress, national policy, and Kansas. And Kansans look at what's going on in the state, and they're willing to listen to maybe, what happens in terms of these issues, but they don't like federal mandates. I think that's pretty clear.
Okay, so got more to talk about here. Let's go ahead and go over to the next topic. We're going to talk now about abortion rights. So, of course, that was huge during the primary, a little bit less significant during the general election, but the argument and the conversation was still there. But what do you think the survey results showed about what Kansans think about abortion rights?
So we've had 2 elections. We had the August election on the abortion amendment, and then we had November. And here's what we've got, Deneysha. We got almost a 20% margin of Kansans saying no, essentially they really didn't want to ban abortion. And then we had November, where the one candidate really stressing abortion rights, Sharice Davids in the 3rd District in Kansas, wins by double digits. And then we have this survey that shows across the board voters in Kansas saying they support access to abortion. So what I'm seeing is a bit of a disconnect from people who say, oh, Kansas is this huge anti-abortion state. It's just not showing up in 2022. I think Kansas voters, and I think many Kansans, are really think it's a complicated issue, and they believe that there are exceptions in which abortion, has to happen, and it's this nuance is coming through. It's not this black and white issue that sometimes it's painted as.
Black and white issue, very, very significant that you say that. So when I also looked at another portion of the survey, and it listed what people thought were the most important issues as they went to the polls, economy, of course, was number 1. Abortion, I believe it only had 8% of Kansans who believed that it was a large issue. So that really shows Kansans kind of want this to be done and over with.
I'm going to disagree in a sense, in the sense that there's some surveys that were done before the midterm elections that were in talking to people saying what's the most important issue, and a lot of voters were saying, I can think about 3 or 4 different issues at the same time. And so it's not an either or. This survey shows that actually Roe v. Wade and abortion was important. It just wasn't the most important. And when we look at these surveys, they're asking what's the most important issue. But this survey also shows that a lot of people were thinking about abortion. You saw that too.
Yeah, they're thinking about it.
When they went in and voted. And so they were thinking about a lot of things. And I think the election results showed that.
Definitely. Thinking about it and talking about it too. That was your look at Inside Kansas Politics. If you want to keep up to date on all things Kansas, then follow us on social media. You can follow us on Twitter at InKansasPolitics. We'll also post the full video, as I just said. You'll find that on YouTube. Just search KSNT News and check ksnt.com/inside-kansas-politics for all past episodes. And of course, if you want a story that you want Kansas State legislators to hear about, let us know. Again, we thank political analyst Bob Beatty for joining us. And of course, we will see you here, same time, same place. See you next Sunday.